It's Friday, September 5th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, we're going to do something a little bit different. It's a collaboration between me and my friend and friend of the show, Andy Moore. I had him on really early in Make It Make Sense, and he is a vital resource for me when it comes to all things fair elections. He's the executive director of the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. He is the head of the organization Let's Fix This, which is based in Oklahoma City, and host of the fantastic podcast Let's Pod This, also based in OKC. And what you're going to get today is the conversation we had on Let's Pod This. I went on as a guest. It's a really fantastic conversation. It's also something, frankly, a little bit outside my comfort zone. I'm the one being interviewed in this conversation instead of the other way around. It's wide-ranging, freewheeling, whatever you want to call it, but we talk all about things like media literacy, where I get my news, how I do this job to bring you the things to make it make sense each week, the stories that I think are overcovered right now, the stories I think are undercovered, although if you listen to this show, you've definitely heard me talk a lot about those things, and then what I think is going to happen next in American politics. But it's a great conversation. Andy is a fantastic host, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. But first, make sure that you're following or subscribed to this show on whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got brand new articles up each week. It is just $5 a month to get access to that. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. All right, let's get to the show. Today's episode is brought to you by Cozy Earth. The school year is on the way, or it started for many of us already, and that means a return to stressful schedules and hectic lives, or honestly just the news with the way that it's been. If you're like me, you're looking for a way to just unwind. With Cozy Earth, you can transform your space, whatever it is, into an elevated haven where serenity and renewal intertwine effortlessly. I really like their bamboo sheets. They keep me cool, especially in these dog days of summer. And I really like their luxe robe. I'm a robe guy. I know, say what you will, but these are about as good as it gets. I'll even avoid planning things on the weekend just to spend a little bit more time in this robe. Now, Cozy Earth's products are a favorite among many celebrities. Kris Jenner praises their bamboo sheets as her nightly essential, raving about their softness and cooling comfort. And for 7 consecutive years, 7, Oprah has included Cozy Earth on her favorite things list with free shipping on orders over $50, a 100-night sleep trial, and a 10-year warranty. Cozy Earth will bring lasting luxury and comfort into your home. Visit CozyEarth.com and use the exclusive 40% off code for Make It Make Sense, MIMS25. That's MIMS25. It's good for any purchase, and it's the best deal, and it cannot be found anywhere else but here on Make It Make Sense. Now, Make It Make Sense does get a cut of that sale, but, it keeps the show going. It puts you in some new sheets or towels, and it keeps me in my favorite robe. Again, visit CozyEarth.com and use the code MIMS25 for 40% off. Wrap the ones you love in luxury with Cozy Earth. Okay, let's get back to the show.
Hey, everybody. Today on the show, I'm joined by a good friend, a national political reporter, Granthermes. Some of you in Oklahoma may know Grant from when he was on News 9 here in Oklahoma City several years ago. He has since moved from here to Detroit and then to Boston and then back to Detroit. But he is now the host of the Make It Make Sense podcast and Substack of the same name. And you do have to search for Make It Make Sense with Granthermes. There's a lot of folks trying to make sense out there. They're not all succeeding as much as Grant is. But Grant's podcast is one that I listen to every week, and he's been digging into some of the bigger national stories lately. He started doing this last year, just over a year ago. And I would say for me, I listen to some national news. I usually read the AP, I listen to NPR. But a lot of my time and attention is focused on either on Oklahoma issues, government, democracy here, or narrowly focused nationally, but narrowly on the democracy space, electoral reform stuff. Grant, as a reporter, covers all kinds of stuff, right? Department of Justice subpoenas, gerrymandering, what all this stuff kind of means, police occupation of Washington, D.C. and other cities. So I feel like Grant's got a knack for cutting through the noise and making the complicated stuff clear, which is certainly something we like to do here. So that's why he's a great guest for us today. That was a too long introduction, but Grant, welcome back to the show.
It is a pleasure to be here. It's always great to talk to you. You're making me blush. That was a nice intro. It wasn't too long. You could have kept going, honestly, Andy. It was good.
30 minutes of why I think you're a good journalist. That's what you want to have. That's what you want to have. Well, maybe let's kind of start there, because I think I want to talk to you about, I guess, media literacy a little bit, and then also news, like what's happening in America right now. But I think it's gotten harder for all of us to like find truth. There's a lot of, to quote Stephen Colbert, there's a lot of truthiness out there. And it helps that like, I know you as a person, like I've known you for, about a decade. And so like, there's some mutual trust we have because we have a relationship. But for someone who doesn't know you, you have to build that trust with your audience. And I wanted to kind of just, I think for me, part of that is like learning how journalists do journalism, right? Like what does it take to go into a story? So for you, if you're reading headlines every day, what's your kind of process? How do you decide what to discuss? How do you do your research? Kind of talk us through it.
Sure. I mean, like, in the approach, because you sort of asked two questions there, but like in the approach, just how these episodes get done and how I decide what I'm going to do, it's generally a thing that has been sort of nagging at me for a little while, or things that I'm confused about. I don't really think of myself as like, I'm not smarter than the average bear. And so if I don't understand something or it's bothering me, it's likely bothering a lot of other people. And that's kind of where I start with that. And then it becomes the decade of doing news research and like poring over things, poring over interviews, reaching out to people that I know, the basic journalism stuff to get a good sense of what's going on, a good handle of those things, and then distilling that information down into a way that is understandable, digestible for people. And I think the trouble with news right now, the sort of truthiness thing that is out there, is that you get this split between people who veer really clearly into the opinion journalism side of this thing, which that's a thing and has been forever since journalism, started. But then also mainstream journalism, which lacks an element of a soul to a certain extent too. Like there is the idea of balance for its own sake, meaning one from column A, one from column B, no matter how outlandish column A or column B might be compared to the other one. That has invaded a lot of American journalism over the last couple decades, and we are sort of seeing the issues with that right now. I think, to put it mildly, American journalism in this moment is ill-equipped to meet what is happening and what is coming out of the current administration. At least most of it is in the mainstream sense, and then because of that, people feel like they're either being patronized to or they're not getting the full story. And so I work really, really hard to make sure that people don't feel like things are going over their heads, but also not treat them like everything is going to go over their heads,
right.
Which is a difficult balance, because the show that I do is for people who know they should be more engaged, but aren't because they're busy, they've got lives, or like the news is hard, especially lately. It's hard and it's so fast. And so to meet people where they are, in a sense of like they want to know more, but they don't want to get overwhelmed, that's this tightrope that I work really hard to walk. Does it always work? Yes and no. That is a day-to-day thing. But that's how I approach this. And then I also, in this, and I just sort of used this in a previous episode I did last week about subpoenas from the Justice Department going to children's hospitals in Philadelphia, specifically targeting trans kids and their parents and their doctors, which is, and I've used this for a long time, and not every newsroom that I've worked in has liked this, but it's something that I call a harm principle, which is decide and cover a story, and it is definitely taking a stance in it, but that's based on how much harm is being done, who it's being done to when we're talking about what we're talking about, and is that harm unnecessary and avoidable? Because if there are ways to not harm people unnecessarily, then why are we doing this thing? And that's the approach that I take to that. It's the approach that I took to that Trans Kids episode, because, it's the United States government targeting a vanishingly small part of the population that is already at risk for harm and doing more harm. And I think the question is, that's not a right-left approach to that. That is a right and wrong approach to that. And that is a really important part of how I approach the job, but not always how broader news approaches the job, although I do think some of that might change in the next few years.
Yeah, well, yeah. Whenever anyone mentions the next few years, it's always like, well, we'll just find out when we get there, won't we? Because who knows?
Right.
I mean, it really does feel like the news cycle has sped up. Even in the decade or so that I've been involved in politics, it used to be a dominant story for a week or two, and now it's 24 hours or less, right? And so thank God that Taylor Swift got engaged the other day, because it's kind of interrupted the normal flow of bad news for at least a few hours.
Yeah, I saw this. There's a TikTok yesterday, actually, from a creator that I like a lot, and she was saying it's crazy to be alive right now, because I will be scrolling through and I'll be like, oh, Taylor and Travis got engaged. That's exciting. And then a little moment of happiness there. And next, and it's oh, the National Guard gets to be armed in DC now. Oh, right. Oh, okay. And then scroll through to the next thing that's oh, they're bringing back a fun video game. That's fun. There's a new Donkey Kong. And it is a bananas time, not to belabor the Donkey Kong reference, but to be someone who's trying to follow the news and for me and you be actively engaged in it.
Well, and that's kind of the thought behind my first question there is how do we define news? Because I think news has gotten to be broader, right? And I guess there was different types of news, celebrity news, business news, but now so much of everything is political, and because every stream of possible news there is has a direct pipeline into our eyeballs through algorithms that we don't really get to control. And so you do get this really scattershot perspective, and it's hard for your brain to put things together in a cohesive way. And so to connect the dots to say, oh, this happened, and then this happened, and this happened, and these are related and not just discrete bad things or something.
Right. I think that is a struggle in doing the news right now, especially because, yes, you get this scattershot of ideas or this smattering of headlines, but also as we're being siloed, we have been for more than a decade now in social media spaces, in the news that we get, that we choose to view, we seek out or not, but increasingly it's not. We're just being shown things, and often those things confirm our own biases. They feel good to watch. And that is also one of the things when it comes to media literacy, that it's if you are overly angry about the things you're watching or seeing or listening to, or you feel overly good about the points that are being made in those things all the time, you likely don't have a great news diet. And it can be difficult to stick yourself in a space that is then uncomfortable in listening to a podcast that's not your thing, turning on a TV show that's not your thing, following people online who don't believe the same thing you believe. And that isn't to say that you have to find common ground with them. That's not, I don't think that's the important part. I think the exposure is the important part, because then it does give you a reference. And there are lots of services that are trying to do this, they have bias meters and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
I don't know if those are generally helpful or healthy in terms of a media diet, but it might be a good place to start for a lot of folks.
Yeah. Well, and so there's one called All Sides that I've used for years. I know the folks behind it, and it's good. And they do kind of present stuff with different perspectives about the same story, kind of, which has gotten harder and wilder, because it might be the same story and two very different perspectives on it, where you're are you even talking about the same horse here?
Yeah.
And then there's a new one that I've seen several creators, or whatever we want to call them, people I follow, talk about it. It's called, so I assume they're being paid, but it's called Ground News.
Yeah.
And I haven't used it, but I've just seen people. I'm like, oh, maybe I should check it out. So
yeah, I haven't checked that one out. I use all sides when I do those things too. But you're right. Like there is that old story about like the blind guys feeling an elephant and all thinking it's a different thing, and like that's kind of what it used to be. But now, when you look at how different the way the stories are written and covered, even in the difference between a place that is like Fox News and a place that is like MSNBC, they used to be sort of equidistant, I would say, on either side of the political spectrum, and now they can be very far apart.
Right.
Where like some dude is holding the trunk of this elephant, and the other guy is like got his hand inside the back end of the elephant. Right. Like it is just like what? Yeah. And I think that also turns people off to doing the work of some of the media literacy stuff that you're asking about. And like I don't know if there's a lot of will in newsrooms right now to build that trust back. I've said it before on my show and in other interviews that like when you really talk to the people who are in a lot of the major newsrooms and even a lot of local ones around the country, they've kind of lost the thread a little bit. It's not so much a coverage problem, but a mission problem. And that has to do with the pace of the news cycle. It has to do with the intense politicization of viewership and readership and listenership. Because that's difficult and they're loud and everything about the media ecosystem is still advertising supported. And so if people get mad and walk away, you're not going to get paid.
Yeah.
And your reporters aren't going to get paid, and then you're going to shut down. And so it's hard. And it's why you see a lot of the like fluff stories in a lot of places, or a lot of the couching language that we know actually obfuscates the truth a little bit, or just outright, omitting key details of certain things. And I don't know if that's going to change. It doesn't feel like it's going to change anytime soon, but I think that's also why you got the rise of a lot of independent journalists right now moving to places like I went to Substack and did this podcast instead of going back to a newsroom, because things were changing about the industry that also make it harder for people who want to know what's going on to know what's going on.
Right. I was telling my wife last night about a podcast. So as our listeners of my show know, I'm a big fan of, or was a big fan of 538 Politics podcast. And Nate Silver they laid off some staff. Their parent company did. Then Nate left, and there was just a few of them left. And then finally, earlier this year, right after the election, the parent company, Disney, let it all go, closed it up. So the host of that show, Galen Druk, has his own podcast called the GD Politics Podcast, which I do recommend, and a Substack. and then a lot of the other folks that were regulars on the show have all ended up mostly in other newsrooms, like Harry Enton's at CNN. And Jeffrey Skelly's at Decision Desk, and Claire Malone is at the New Yorker or something, but there's everyone's kind of spread out, and Galen has still been having everyone on the show pretty regular, including Nate. And last night I was like, man, I realized that I get to listen to all of my favorite kind of political commentators still on a podcast, but instead of that money going to ABC, it's going to Galen directly. Well, some of it goes to Substack, but it was a different relationship. But then I was like, oh, but if I didn't know them, I met them, I didn't meet them, I became to know their voices through 538, which was its own entity. But if it really, I was like, they surely have new listeners who have come to them individually afterwards. And it was just, the whole model has so changed that I think it is interesting that we end up getting our news from siloed sources. I think it's even more important than to have trust in the outlet or the individual from whom you're getting your journalism intake.
Yeah. And that is a really interesting piece of this right now, because so much of that trust has to be earned. So much more of it has to be earned, I should say, because if you work in a newsroom, in a big one like that, especially when 538 got folded into ABC, you have the backing and the legacy of ABC. the trappings that come with that, or being in whatever newsroom it is for any journalist, and then to break out on your own. For me, for sure, it was one of those stark things where it was like, oh, when I, try to get a hold of an old contact or to get a guest onto the show or whatever, it's like, oh, I can't say that I'm with this newsroom anymore. And so now I've got to approach this a little bit differently. And the trust is built solely on me and my reporting. Not that it wasn't there before, but, it came with a little extra push from the name recognition of your news agency or your news outlet. And so that is also super interesting, because in a really blue sky ideal about this, that could mean a lot of democratization of the media, in which people who can earn trust easily might have a better chance at reaching people. Are they good journalists? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's also the other thing.
My hunch, and then we can wrap up this topic, but my hunch is this is a typical ebb and flow of this market, right? Where there was an explosion into a bunch of individual or new media outlets. And I imagine in a few years, probably in a post-Trump world, individuals will coalesce, right? And I think you're even part of some podcast network, right?
Yeah.
So I think we'll start seeing more of those. Some of those are going to be successful, some won't, but there'll be this coming back together and rebuilding of newsrooms in a new way. That'll be interesting. But I think we're probably, 5 to 6 years out
from that. Yeah. Not everything's in place for that. Right. Yeah. Or the end of the world could happen. Who knows? Yeah.
Grant, let's talk about some actual news stories. We've been talking about the news in a, platonic form of the news. But I'm interested at the national level, with, national stories. What do you think is the most overcovered and undercovered stories in the past month?
I think the most overcovered stories, and this is going to be kind of a hot take, is the tariffs. Not because they do affect our lives. They will affect our lives, especially going into the school year, into the holidays. That will matter. But it has, how do I want to say this? It's shallower than people think it is as a story. When you really look at what has been done by the White House when it comes to these trade deals, or handshake agreements is what most of them are, and then when you get them on paper, a lot of the things the president has promised, they're not a part of it. $600 million or $1 billion was supposed to come from the EU. That's not a part of this deal. There was a lot of the things that happened in let's even take when the White House walked out the China trade deal. That was actually just a deal to continue to agree to talking about a deal. It's all those things. And yes, there's a lot of schadenfreude about hitting Trump for the, Trump always chickens out taco thing or whatever that you're seeing a lot of places. But that, because it feels safe, I think, to a lot of journalists, because it is hard and fast numbers and you can point and shoot basically to these things, I think it's overcovered. And also economic things like that take time to develop out. And so while we're focusing on the long predictions of these things, we're also missing a lot of the things that are happening that probably should have more time to them. And I know that, again, that's kind of that's a little bit of a hot take to say, tariffs, look at them, know what's happening, and then be like, okay, and then move on.
Well, the tariffs also change very frequently, right? And so I think it's tough, right? Because they come up, it's a news story, and everything the president says is a news story, and a lot of the stuff is just him rambling on. Now, the tariffs are not necessarily rambles, and they can have significant impact, but because they've shifted so much, I would imagine makes it almost impossible to unless you have a current live tracker of which countries have tariffs and what the rate is. That stuff's subject to change as much as the price of, a particular stock or something.
Right. Unless you're somebody who is working on a trade floor, or your company or your job is specifically tied to the tariff import or export price of some specific good. And I don't mean like in an abstract way, like I live in Detroit and the Canadian tariffs, because I can see Canada from my house, like are going to affect the city of Detroit because of auto tariffs or whatever. Yeah. That's not what I mean. I mean, literally, like if your bank account or your paycheck at the end of the week is going to be affected by this thing, then you should care about some of the fluctuation, but not even the individual fluctuation of these things. I think, again, it's kind of low-hanging fruit, also because the president says so many things about the tariffs, because that's where he's comfortable in that economic lane. He thinks he's really, really good on this. And it's easy to cover those things. But again, it's sort of getting away from some of the bigger things that I think need a deeper discussion that the news isn't spending a lot of time on. Yeah. Which, like, for me, the main story is the march into authoritarianism that we're seeing right now, which I know sounds...
do you feel like that's the undercovered story?
No. Like, that's one that is so in our faces that like it is there, but it's the way that it's being covered. People aren't real comfortable with being like, hey, like, if not dictator, then why dictator shaped? Like kind of, language. Like we should be already there because you've got constitutional scholars, authoritarian scholars, legal experts, historians, all being like, hey, it's a lot of this is right from the playbook. It's not even original. It's like from chapter 6 in like whatever, like, in the dictator's handbook, like it's right here. And so there's a lot of that we're not looking at and pointing to. I wrote about on the Substack a few weeks ago about how authoritarians have a specific focus on their capital cities and controlling arts and fine art. And that I wish would get a little more coverage. But the story that I really think isn't getting covered is our loss of good government data. There is a whole network of librarians in the country right now working to save this data. They're working together to store it in certain places, but we are talking census data, labor statistics data, which is the beating heart of our economy. We are talking health data, weather data from places like the National Weather Service and NOAA. All of those things that this administration doesn't like for lots of reasons because they're unhelpful to their policy goals or their aims, or even their political aims and beliefs. All that stuff is being lost. And in a post-MAGA America, because that will happen and change, whether that's 5 years from now or 25 years from now, that will change. We won't have the data to support the things that we need to change. And so thinking about things like 10-year business contracts between airliners and manufacturers, they can't work out proper contracts, which means they won't be able to pay people the right rates. You've got things like climate change and making sure that cities on our coasts are set up and ready for that. Cities in places like Tennessee and Kentucky that are going to be hit by a lot more tornadoes than they used to be because Tornado Alley is moving. We know that kind of a thing. And so we're not doing enough talking about what happens when we lose this data because everything is built on it, whether we think so or not.
Grant, where's the data going? Are they deleting the data? Or are they just taking it off of websites that make it publicly accessible?
Yeah, so a lot of it is being lost from public access, but a lot of it is just not being collected anymore. And that's the kind of thing that I mean. So like you can't get a hold of certain, HHS, Health and Human Services, health data anymore. There's certain kinds of weather data you can't get a hold of anymore. Obviously, with the firing of the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we're not going to have great data from the new guy that Trump handpicked who was photographed at January 6th, but also has said that he sort of has a vendetta against numbers, I think. But like, I don't know.
I wonder which one.
But like
7, 8, which one's the most
right.
Which
just the primes. Yeah. Yeah, the 7 because it 8, 9, right? Where's the high? Thank you. Yeah, rim shot. But like those, we're going to have a lack of access to numbers. We are going to stop collecting numbers and data, and we are going to lose good statistics. based on those things. And so there are generally universities and some private companies, although that's a different thing, are still collecting some of this data. They're still trying to collate some of it. They're still trying to keep track of it, but they don't have the resources that the government has, just in terms of employees, in terms of money, in terms of what used to be sort of a political will to do it, or an apolitical will, a bureaucratic will to do it. And then private companies, while a lot of them say they have this secret sauce, they might, but the baseline of all their stuff is government data. And so they're not doing the collecting because it's too expensive to do it. So we're going to lose a lot of that. And I think that is one of these things that, while a little heady, is a thing that is going to impact us every time we pick up our phones. And it'll probably start in earnest, really hitting people in the next year.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, I used to work in public health and HIV community. And so we used and collected a ton of data. I mean, it's healthcare, so there's tons of data anyway. A lot of the data we collected was aggregated, so it would be publicly available, like the number of cases of HIV in a county or in a state or a country, as well as like all the population, like census data. We always had to do that. So all of the grants that I was responsible for, we had to, report population data for our state, for our service area, and then for our programs directly. And was super useful all the time, right? Like looking at things like community viral load as an indicator of how infectious the community might be or not. And the number of cases of other STDs or all that kind of stuff was like really useful in guiding action, right? Like, and so if the federal government is hiding data, like they just take off the website and it's like stored in a folder somewhere, but no one knows where to go get it. I mean, that in some ways takes us back, 30 years before we had access. All this data is being collected, but it wasn't on the internet because the internet didn't exist. But also if they just stop collecting it, then we're going to have this gap, right? And that means that activities of the government might not be based on, or any other organization that uses it, but like those activities might not be based on data. And so you have arguably situations like right now where the president is alleging, high crime rates in certain cities, and the cities are like, no, it's not. Like, we've been collecting data on this for 80 years. This is the lowest it's been in however long. But so it seems like the presence of hard data would serve as a foil to, claims of anything else. And if it's the administration that's taking down the data and also making the claims, I don't think it's a partisan statement to say like, this seems connected somehow.
Right. I mean, case in point, before the president took control of the Metro Police in DC, he had pulled out this chart that they had then put up on other social media feeds that said that DC was the most dangerous capital city in the world, and over much more dangerous places places we would consider to be much more dangerous more often. And for the life of me, I could not find the data to back that up.
Right.
And I know that somewhere we have those numbers, but for some reason they weren't available in any government database. They weren't available in any way that made any sense to what they were saying from there. And so like, while I played the clip on my show of the president saying that, I did not show the chart because I just couldn't find numbers to support that thing. That didn't mean that DC, when you looked at the numbers, that it didn't fall in the top 100 most dangerous cities in the world, which is not just capital cities, but like it did. It was like 72 or 68 or something.
Right.
But like not more dangerous than Bogota, Colombia. Right. Like it was like I couldn't find that anywhere.
Right.
But without hard data to back that up, then it's just my word against the president's word.
Right.
And people who want to take his word for it because they like him are just going to take that.
Yeah. Well, and so what do you do with people who would argue that like the government data was a lie in the first place? Are they
like
just
in general, like in the specifics where now the Oversight Committee in Congress is investigating whether the Metro Police in DC were manipulating crime data.
Oh, I didn't hear that. But
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of just people, right? Maybe they don't listen to your show, but like just general public who are like, well, they probably were lying about it anyway, or it's getting into conspiracy territory, right?
Yeah. I think the answer to that thing is the thing that I was talking about before, is that like our current economy, the way that our world works in the United States, and a lot of the rest of the world too, by the way, operates because of solid government data. And so if you're somebody who believes that the government was already making up this stuff, or it was fabricated in some way or fashion or form, then that is also to say that like the rest of everything, the underpinnings of all that, is also fabricated. And that's a really hard worldview to have without it becoming like full-blown tinfoil hat stuff.
Yeah.
And like generally when people want to push back on that, it's kind of like, yeah, that idea means that things are just too big to be that bad, in that way, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like so many things, you don't realize what you have until it's gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think we take for granted a lot of stuff, like government data.
Right.
If even here in Oklahoma, I was watching OETA the other weekend morning, and they do like the weekend farm report. Well, they have tons of data, weather data, crop data, rainfall, all this stuff that like shows the condition, the density, the yield of all of these crops. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is fascinating. And the way they talked about it, I was like, just picturing, thousands of farmers across the state watching this every week to get information that informs how they farm for the coming week. They look at weather reports and forecasts and all this, and that ends up being the food we eat. And so it was such a good demonstration of like, it takes a nerd with a clipboard to make a lot of things go around. And when we have diminished the value of that work, especially over some mistaken reason, I think we're going to start seeing like real world kitchen table impacts of things that we took for granted before.
Right. It's funny you mentioned the farm report. I have a pretty specific memory in Oklahoma City when I was doing the 4 a.m. show of reading some of the farm report for a little while on air. And like, it was all Greek to me, but it mattered to somebody at home watching it. Yeah. And then I think somebody either maybe from the Farm Bureau or State Ag, like just ended up recording audio over it. But like there was a period in which I was like reading corn prices and like, what the weather was going to be. It was really, it was interesting, but I was also like, this means something to somebody and it's important that we have it. And if we don't have it, like, I don't know what that's going to mean for the guy trying to grow soybeans or the guy trying to get his cattle from one acreage to another. Yeah. Like, it means something to somebody. Yeah.
Well, that's funny. My father-in-law has apparently watches it as well, and he's been telling us for the last couple weeks. He's like, the price of beef keeps going up. And I was like, we don't eat a lot of beef, so I hadn't noticed. And he was like, how much does a hamburger cost now? I was like, I don't know. Like, I'll look at the menu online for like Tucker's or some local burger place. And he's like, it's going to go up. I'm telling you. He's like, they said it again this week on the farm report, like the price of beef. And he like went into detail about the low supply in America, and then now the difficulty in importing beef from other countries. And he's like, we don't have enough. The supply's low. It's going to go up. And I was just like, how does this guy who's 76 and like lives in my garage know this much about the price of beef? And it's because of government data that's made available in public media. Like, it was a wild example of like, okay.
Also, I am compelled to go back and say a thing and explain a thing that I said earlier.
Yeah.
So the Washington, D.C. Metro Police Department is currently being investigated by the Oversight Committee in the House of Representatives in Congress, because they've been accused of manipulating crime statistics. And just as like a little news blurb here, what that was that D.C. had been inputting and collecting crimes and then categorizing them differently than the FBI, which is not, there's nothing wrong with that. Cities everywhere do it. But it did show, because of the way they were categorizing these things, that violent crime and specific crimes in D.C. had fallen much, much further compared to what the FBI had shown. So I think it was like violent crime was down around 30% in DC. The FBI had it down around 9% because of the way that they categorize crimes.
Yeah.
And there was a commander, I believe, or a sergeant in the MPD that had come forward and said that he was wrongfully suspended for trying to raise this issue. There seems to be some internal axe grinding with that, but the police union is backing him in this thing. They also have a vested interest in saying that crime rates are high because then they have better leverage when it comes to renegotiating contracts with the city because there's more of a need than for police, is what they get to say. So they get to, say that they're manipulating crime rates to be lower, so the blah, blah, blah. But the House Oversight Committee is now fully investigating that thing, which is their job because they are in control of DC in Congress.
Yeah.
But that's that story. That's what I meant by that. So
no, I appreciate that clarification. I'm now thinking, and this makes me feel like a conspiracy theorist, as does a lot of news today, but it's like knowing the basically the federal government's oversight of DC and everything in it, home rule provisions notwithstanding, and he's moved in National Guard troops and is now vilifying the local police. Like, just curious of like what we might see in a few weeks if this is testing out to be like, is this a way for us to eliminate the DC police and like supplant them with the National Guard? And this, I'm not saying it is. This is the kind of like weird space we're in where like an idea that sounds absolutely crazy and might be like now seems plausible because other things that seemed crazy have come to pass.
Right. I think when it comes to that kind of a thing too, it's really important to keep in mind that there are practicalities and logistics that have to come into play. As with all conspiracies, by the way, like my thing when I approach people who are conspiracy theorists or have conspiracies, it takes a lot of people to pull off a conspiracy in the way that people think about them. More often than not, things are bad because of incompetence. And unfortunately, there like generally isn't somebody driving the bus when these things happen. That's how they happen. And the idea of conspiracy is that like it's comforting that there is some nefarious bus driver versus entropy versus chaos. That is why people gravitate towards conspiracy theories. But like when it comes to the specific thing you're asking here, the thing that we need to talk about is who these troops are who are going to be in DC. Can Trump supplant the DC police? Maybe. It'd be really hard for Congress to get that through. They would need, 2/3 majority in both chambers to make something like that happen, which is nearly impossible to get right now. But even if that were to happen, we're running out of money. States are paying for the guards to be in these places, to be in DC right now. And several states, the big one, I think yesterday or 2 days ago was Wyoming, was like, hey, we need money from Congress to keep our guard members paid because they're being loaned to the president right now under a section called 502. I talked about it yesterday at the time we're taping this in my episode. And so if they run out of money, well, there's no reason for these troops to stay because they don't actually work for the president. They work for the governors of their state under this current rule. Because a judge in California it seems to be on the edge of saying that Trump can't federalize troops in the way that he did it in LA. So he's trying to this other way, the way that he used it in 2020 during the George Floyd protests in DC. There's also the thing that the current deployment is costing about $1 million a day in DC. And the stat that I found the most interesting about the DC deployment stuff is that in the National Guard in the United States right now, there are, let's see if I can remember these numbers off the top of my head here, 5,000 law enforcement officers, 5,000 first responders, so officers, firefighters, EMTs, 3,500 non-EMT medical professionals, so people like doctors and nurses, 5,000 teachers, and 2,600 engineers currently serving in the U.S. National Guard in various states. All of those people, at least those people from 19 states who Trump has requested them from, will be coming to D.C., meaning they'll be leaving their communities in which they work on a day-to-day basis to keep people safe and healthy. And a lot of states, after a certain amount of time of deployment, are going to be like, hey, we need cops. Buildings are burning. Kids have had the same substitute teacher for 2 weeks and they're not learning. Our emergency rooms are were already overwhelmed and now they're more overwhelmed. Like, we can't be doing this. And so there is a logistics problem with how long this thing could last. Is there a world in which the president might try to privately fund the National Guard to keep some of these things because he's made so much money since he's come into office?
Right.
Maybe, but that's also not really his style, because then he's got culpability. He's footing the bill for it. And then that means that he's now responsible for these things, which he doesn't like to do.
Yeah.
So I think in some of the worrying of the what ifs down the road, it is important to remember there are like practicalities that still will get in the way. That doesn't mean, like I said before, a lot of this stuff isn't authoritarian shaped, because it is.
Right.
But there are things that will get in the way because it's 2025 and not 1925.
Right. Well, I'm always amazed at how well-laid plans are foiled by something simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, maybe a popular example is like how Al Capone was supposedly brought down by a
tax evasion,
right? Or I don't know, like every land war in Europe, right? Or like in Russia, right? Where in Asia, where like it comes down to like getting groceries and fuel across a long distance, and it's like the logistics is the part that like grinds stuff to a halt.
Right. Did we make Leningrad by November and not December? Like, we didn't, because it was muddy that fall. Like, which I think it was actually the spring. It doesn't really matter, but like, you get my point. Yeah. It's that kind of a thing. And that is a thing that will happen and will get in the way of a lot of these things that we're seeing. So I think an approach like that is good and smart, and also brings a level of comfort if people are worried about what they're seeing right now.
Yeah.
But there is also the thing too that like damage is being done, and that is a thing to contend with.
We'll wrap up in just a second. I have to go to DC in 2 weeks from the day that we're recording this, and I'm like, the other day I was like, I think I've got a little bit of anxiety about going, which I never had before, and it was because the other day on a call, a colleague who's based in DC said that their Uber Eats and like DoorDash delivery costs were going through the roof.
Sure.
Because ICE has been like grabbing people off of their like little moped, like delivery scooters to like investigate them or detain them or whatever. And so it means that people aren't getting their food, and it just is like causing the whole thing. And she was like, she's like, I almost can't have lunch because there's no restaurants near me, and the cost to order something is like $30. Now it's like way higher than it used to be. And so I was like, oh, that's a unintended consequence of immigration policy that people didn't think about.
That is interesting, and that is a story that I'm now going to work on, because because it's also a question to it. At some point, does somebody like a company like DoorDash or Postmates have a responsibility to protect these people who they don't think are employees in a lot of places, but are independent contractors? And so, like, is this hurting their bottom line? Does that, does it then hurt the bottom line of restaurants around DC or whatever? I do think it's interesting when you go, pay attention to where the Guard is. I was actually just there a couple nights ago. We flew into DC, but flying over, I was looking at where the Guard was, because about 2 weeks ago, maybe last week, what is time? I saw the map that the Washington Post put up about where different federal agencies in the Guard was deployed, and I went, I wonder what the route from the White House to Joint Base Andrews is, where he flies out of. And it is not a one-to-one, but like, if you were in a presidential limo, you could see all these people, and they weren't anywhere else. And people in DC are like, hey, that's not where the crime is. There isn't crime on the National Mall. Right. It's elsewhere, but that's not where they are. So I'd be interested to see if you can see that from the ground. I could see that from the air when I flew over a couple nights ago, but I'd be curious to see what you see.
Yeah. I'll scope it out. I'm staying just a few blocks up, just like Mount Vernon Square area. So
nice.
It's not a nice place I'm staying, but that's where I'm staying. And but I always make a little pilgrimage to the Lincoln Memorial at night, and that takes me right down that route. So I'll scope it out. Well, Grant, I've got to wrap up for today, but thank you so much for joining us today on the show. It's always good to talk to you.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you too, Andy. Really.
We big thanks for breaking it all down today. Listeners, if you liked this conversation, I encourage you, check out the Make It Make Sense podcast and or Substack. I'll put links to that in the show notes for you can find it. Grant is also on social media, Twitter,
all the
Instagram.
Things.
What's your handle?
It is on Twitter, X, Bluesky. It's Granthermes, at Granthermes. That's also Instagram and TikTok. And the other places, it's at Granthermes TV. But if you search my name, Hermes, it'll come up. Same thing with the podcast. It's Make It Make Sense with Grant Herms. You got to search the full name because, like you said at the beginning, there are a lot of folks who say they're making it make sense out there right now. And while I am one of them, I promise I'm doing my best.
A lot of folks trying to fix things too. I'll tell you that as someone who runs an organization with that in the name.
No one quite like you, though, Andy. No one can fix it like you.
That's right. Let's fix this with Andy Moore. All right, folks. That's it for this week. Decisions are made by those who show up. Find a way to show up this week. See ya.
I want to thank Andy again for having me on his show, for letting me replay the interview here on Make It Make Sense. And I'm going to put links to Let's Pod This, Let's Fix This, the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, and all the other fantastic stuff Andy is doing right now. If you're one of the listeners that I have in Oklahoma City, Texas, or you want somebody who wants a peek behind the curtain of what it's like to live in a deeply conservative state, you got to go check out the stuff Andy is doing. It is really amazing work. And as always, rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, leave a comment if you're on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. It is just $5 a month to get access to all sorts of great bonus content each week. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims Newspod. That's MIMS Newspod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on X and Bluesky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you next week.